Okay, we're back. We're ready to finish up our day one, the second session of it. Let's review a little bit of what we talked about in our first session, that there's a great need and an urgency to reach out to people with disabilities, and that we know that Jesus set the example in 37 different incidents that are recorded, maybe more. It talks about how Jesus helped somebody who had a brokenness, a need, a physical need, a mental need, and that he helped them and he taught them. And like the four friends that brought their friend that was paralytic to meet Jesus, when Jesus first met him, he told him his sins were forgiven, and not, I'm going to heal you first, but that his soul was more important to God than even his ability to walk, that being able to be in heaven was more important than that. So he forgave him his sins, and the man was saved, and then he healed him. And we talked about how we want to do this because we want other people to do it for us. And that some people are disabled and some people are temporarily abled. So at some point you might be the one that's like, people are going to treat me the way I've been treating them. Might be something to think about. But this is the largest unreached people group in the world. And I know Jesus is commanding people to reach out to these families and these caregivers and these people with disabilities in a way that will help them and minister to them. And it can't be a one and done. I led them to the Lord. There has to be discipleship, like it talks about in the Great Commission, that you're not going to just leave them hanging. You're going to walk beside them and have compassion for them. And that there's going to be an ongoing ministry that will help them and their families deal with their ongoing problems that don't cure themselves all at once. So we just want to keep this in mind as we move forward, and we're going to consider this session to be about compassion. Compassion is not pity that we discussed earlier, or even empathy. Well, I feel so sorry for them. Or in the South, we like to say, bless their hearts. That's an American thing. You might not get that one. But it's kind of like, yeah, we want to give them a blessing, but we really like saying in that, well, I'm glad I'm not in their shoes. But compassion goes beyond that. It is putting yourself in their shoes. It's being uninterrupted. It's interrupting your daily flow of things to reach out and help somebody else. It's putting yourself in their shoes, what it would be like to be them. What do they really need to help? I think about the Good Samaritan and how the priest and the Levite were so busy getting on about their business of the church that they did not have time to help. It was the Samaritan who interrupted his day, stopped where he was going and what he was doing to take the time to help. That's what the story of compassion looks like. In several places in the Bible it says Jesus had compassion. When he saw people in need, he had compassion. Even the Sermon on the Mount, they had been preaching the day before, they had been in the boat, and he comes to the shore, and there's gathered a bunch of people there, and the disciples were like, let them go away. And he's like, no, let them come and sit, and we'll talk, and we'll teach. And so Jesus always found a way to show love and compassion to others, and that's really what we need to do. So let's pray about that. Jesus, we just ask that you would help us to be in the right place at the right time, and to have your love and your compassion and your kindness so that we can help others as you would help them, that you are a model, and that you modeled patience and love, and that you would open our hearts and the hearts of everyone who hears this, that they would help families that need help. And that we ask that your loving presence would be with us now as we discuss what some of these needs are and what some of these ministries are and how we could help people who are in need. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. So we know that God, we said that we're all created in his image. It starts right there in Genesis chapter 1. So God created man in his own image, in the image of God. He created him, male and female, he created them. So we know that all humans were created in the image of God. And we're not measured by our abilities or disabilities or our accomplishments or lack of, or failures or our talents or lack of talent. We're measured by God's love, and we're made in His image. And, you know, we're weak. And God is strong, and it tells us that too in several places in the Bible. In 2 Corinthians, verse 12, chapter 12, verse 9, it says, and this is Jesus speaking, "My grace is sufficient for thee, and my strength is made perfect in weakness." So we often see people with disabilities as weak, but God says His strength is made perfect in that. Talk about a purpose for life. Right there's an example of showing you, you don't have to be good at everything or anything to be used by God. That our weaknesses doesn't matter. It's our obedience to God and being willing to do what He would have us do. So regardless of our own lives, our good, our bad, our ugly, whatever we want to think about our own lives, we're His masterpiece, and we're created for His purpose. We don't know why disabilities exist. Some people say, well, we can ask in heaven. I don't think when we get there it's going to matter to us, so I don't think we'll ask. But if we do, if somebody does, that's fine, but because God's got the answer, He just hasn't given us all the answers yet. But there are a lot of causes. There are a lot of unknown causes. But we know that accidents happen, illness happens, there's birth defects for a lot of reasons. The mother got sick, or there were chemicals. It might be that she was abused or in an accident. There's so many things that could go wrong. All the toxins in our environment, we all could be in a whole lot worse shape than we are. And then there's the violence. And then there's the natural progression of aging. I don't know why people want to say we're going to evolve, because we're not evolving to something better. We're degenerating as it goes. I'm a prime example of degeneration, not evolution. So it's just, we don't have to know the cause, and the parent will want to know, why does my child have this? And when there's no answer, sometimes science has the answer. They can figure out that there's a third chromosome on the 21st trisomy, which is Down syndrome. Okay, they figured that out. Good for them. It doesn't, they still can't explain why it happens, but it doesn't matter. They at least know what it is. But sometimes if science and medicine can't figure it out, then superstition comes into play. And people say, well, it's demonic. It's because this evil spirits in them, or this, it's the results of sin. Their parents sinned, they sinned. So it's considered taboo, a curse to have a disability. And that's where a lot of that victimizing people and abusing people come in, because they don't value their life as important as someone else's. And it's just not right. Unborn children are aborted because from some test, which none of them are 100% accurate, tells them their child may be born with this or that. And so they decide, well, I don't want a child with a disability, I'll just abort them. And they don't even know for sure whether that child would have had that disability or not. And sometimes they're expecting a perfectly healthy child, and their child is born with a disability, because we don't always understand all that. Science has come a long ways, but it can't explain all of it. And then oftentimes when they're born with a disability, they're institutionalized or left to die, saying, you know, this child's life will have no value. And we don't have, that's playing God. There's sanctity to life. It should be valued and sacred, that a life is available, a life is born. As the video I mentioned, the parents were not expecting their child to live. They still carried her full term and couldn't wait to get to hold her and be with her till she passed. And she was a fighter. She survived. So, you know, you never know. There's an article that you have in your stuff that says "Let It Be," and without going into great details about it, basically the parents had a test done, lost that little article again. It's here somewhere. Okay, well, when I get to it in my notes, we'll talk about it. How's that? Okay, so, but they were expecting a child and were told they were going to be healthy when they had the test, and then their child was born with Down syndrome, and they were so glad that the test had been wrong, because they might have made a different decision, and they loved and were blessed by their child. But they had friends who were told that their child was going to have Down syndrome, and they too decided they would keep their child, and their child was born perfectly healthy. So the name of that article is Let It Be. So we've covered it, and you can read it on your own time. It's part of your required reading. But there are a lot of barriers that people face when they are dealing with disabilities. And some of those we've mentioned, the barriers of the architectural barriers with steps and no way to enter buildings and stuff. But they're discriminated against because of their different ways of communicating, their age. I mean, if you don't think that applies, a baby or a young child with a disability is much more acceptable to society than an adult with a disability. Age does matter. I don't know why it's so hard, but it is that they don't want to accept you as you get older. They're more leery of you if you have a disability, and gender comes into that. Women with disabilities are more acceptable than men with disabilities, that they're more fearful of the unknown when it comes to a man with a disability. And then the physical, if it's something physical, then there was more empathy there for someone in a wheelchair than someone with a hidden disability. Where, you know, we really just label and put degrees on it and stuff like that that make it a barrier to dealing with those disabilities based on our own prejudice and our own social type. Stereotyping of different disabilities. And we treat people like they're contagious. Like you just don't want to get close to them because you might catch it. Well, you can't catch Down syndrome. It's in every cell of your body, or you don't have it. And you were born that way, or you don't have it. You can catch the virus, but you can't catch it. Most disabilities are not contagious. And so the judging we've talked about, the feeling contagious, the not having value to their life, those are some of the biggest ones. But also the limitations. We think about how limited their life is, but what we don't realize is that a lot of that is put on them by society, that they don't have the freedom to make some of the same choices that other people have. They have little or no choice in a lot of what goes on in their lives. And so that can be atypical for them too. So whether it was caused by an accident at birth, before birth, in old age, a disability is a disability. And there's degrees of how much it affects their lives and how much help or not have help that they might need. You don't have to have the answers to all that. You don't even have to know all the questions. What you can do is show up. Speak up and speak to people, listen to people. Keep going back, not a one and done thing. I think it's very disappointing for families for you to start something for their children and have it happen once or twice and then it never happens again, because they look so forward to it and then it's not there anymore. So if you're going to start a ministry, you need to think about longevity of it. How often are we going to meet? How long is this going to last? And be upfront about it. If it's a one-time event, be sure that's communicated to the parent and caregiver so they can help prepare their child that this is something special we're going to go do, and they don't think it's something we're going to get to go do all the time after that. Parents know their children better than anyone. No matter how many degrees you have, that parent knows that child, and they need to be the voice you listen to. If they say their parent doesn't like this or does like that, doesn't mean they can't learn something different or learn, but where they are right there is exactly where the parent says they are. And if you don't listen to the parent, then you might cause more problems than help by trying to find a way to circumvent what the parent would have had you do or not do for their child. In this real world, you know, most parents really care about their child. There's only a few, and they're very exceptional, that are not interested in their child. So they are the expert, and it doesn't take somebody with a degree to love and nurture a child. It takes somebody with a heart, and that's what we have in our parents. Our parents have some secrets of how they feel about things, and we get Sue to tell us a little bit about your article. It's got 6 secrets for the special need moms don't talk about. Then you can read the article later.
I was a parent to 2 children. My oldest child was 10 and my youngest child was 5 when we started foster care. And these girls that we was fostering had emotional problems. One girl was deaf, and she was only with us a few weeks, so I didn't really quite understand about disabilities other than the scars of abuse and neglect on their teenagers. But then in 1992, state asked us to take a little boy that had cerebral palsy and special needs because his mother took drugs while he was being developed in her room. And I was very naive. I thought that he was just going to come and be the perfect child, and life would be no different. Well, Philip was 9 years old. He was still in diapers, very dependent because no one saw his abilities. They only saw his disabilities. So it was like coming home with a newborn child. And I soon learned that I was a special needs mom. And many parents give birth to a child, and then they find out that that child has a disability. So they didn't have time to get prepared for that child. So we all have some secrets in being a special needs parent. One of the first things that I realized was the loneliness, because we brought this little boy into our home that was very disruptive at times. We tried taking him to church, and he didn't know how to sit still. He couldn't communicate, and I realized that I was on an island by myself. And it was very lonely until I began to educate myself so that I could educate others. We all need people, and that's very obvious during this time of isolation, where we need socialization. And our special needs community have struggled with this for many, many years, so it's nothing new for them to understand isolation. And we learn to put our antennas up for people who will be compassionate to our children, love them and accept them. And that is so important that we learn to let others into our lives and our children's lives, so that they don't be isolated. But that's one of the secrets, is the loneliness. Another secret is what Sandra had already talked about, is the struggles within the marriage. You know, if you're a single parent before your child was born, you are lonely because you don't have a partner, a husband, a wife, family. But it makes it even harder on our marriages. My husband worked long hours, and I was by myself with 3 children and one, a brand new child in our home with multiple disabilities, and trying to find doctors and resources to help them, plus my children that were just as needed as him, and the fact that they had school and homework and activities, and then working. I had a full-time job, and we had to find a balance, not only with our family, but with my marriage, and how to not leave out anyone. So we had to come up with creative ideas to continue being a husband and wife. And one of those things is finding caretakers and finding people who would accept our children and give us a break every once in a while. I lived away from family. We lived 250 miles away from family, so I knew I didn't have that support. But God began to bring people into our lives that would help, neighbors and co-workers and people in our church that began to offer respite times.
That community of support is so important.
It is.
We've talked about moving before, and I'm like, I can't move. I would lose my support group.
Yes, it is so important. And that's just not a one-time deal. As your child gets older, that support group changes. And to involve them in activities of the community, they may continue to want to play in the playground at age 15 or even 30, and to find families to accept that this adult is playing on the playground with young children. It's important that you find that acceptance.
I'd still swing if I could.
Me too. Yes. And you've got to learn to be thick-skinned, not to be offended by every little word, every little action. I never forget the first time that we went out to eat at a McDonald's. You know how fun McDonald's is. And we carried Philip and our other 2 children into McDonald's, and this family left because we sat down close to them, and how hurt that was. And even my son Thomas said, Mom, do you think they think Philip is contagious, that they can catch his disease? And it dawned on me that I had to learn to accept no matter what, and not let it put me in depression or be isolated. And now, shoot, we just go whatever. You know, when you go into a grocery store or a mall store with 8 special needs adult children, people just kind of part the waves like you brought in a storm or something. I just kind of laugh at them, and I say, you know, we're here to do what you're doing too. It's just a shop, and have a good time. I still get offended sometimes with our church people. That's my main
I
circle.
think our expectations are that the church is going to love us and accept us, and that's one of the hardest places.
You know, my children are out of school now, so their main activity is church related. And you're right. You just think that we're going to be accepted in church, and that's not the case. So you have to learn not to take everything to heart. And then this is a biggie for me in my season of life, now that I'm older. I can't believe I'm 63 years old. Is what happens to my children when I die or get too old to care for them? What's going to happen to them? Are they going to be cared for like I want them to be cared for? And those things have to be addressed and researched. And you hope to be able to raise them until the Lord comes, but that's not reality. So that's another secret that we as aging parents had to face. And I know Sandra's at that age too with her daughter.
Yeah, I depend a lot on my other children and expect them to be involved in her care, which brings you to siblings, which we haven't talked about much, because a lot of times they are expected to pull that off. I've talked to them before about group homes and maybe a place where Mara could have her needs met, and they're like, we don't even want to talk about that. We'll always take care of her. But I was 56 when I adopted Mara.
Yeah.
So my children are old enough they're not old enough to be her grandparent, but they definitely could have been her parents. So they had that same concern of who's going to take care of her after us. So now we're looking at grandchildren to be, are you going to help take care of Mara?
Yeah. In our society here in the United States, they have done away with institutions, and there's group homes throughout our nation. And the problem that we have with these group homes is the quality of care is not the best. And I worry about abuse and neglect, and are they going to be able to continue, my children, if they went into a group home, continue the same activities in church? And it's just a secret that we don't want to discuss, but we have to face. Another secret is body language. And our children many of our children love the physical touch. And oh my goodness, this time of the virus and no touching and social distance.
Yeah, I was fixing to say personal space. They like to get really close to you when they talk to you.
Right. When I do take them out into the community, reminding them over and over, you can't shake their hand, you can't hug them, you can't. Now that we're able to go to church for a few minutes, I have to remind them before we go in, you can't shake hands, and they need that, and we all need that. And just finding ways to meet that need that God established in our hearts and lives. And
as much as we live in fear, think about how fearful it makes them when they can't have that touch.
When all of this, the virus is over with and we can go back to some type of a normalness, don't be afraid to shake their hand. If a mom needs a hug, give a mom a hug, because they have learned, and we as parents could have told them this, but the therapeutic natural language is relax, redirect, and heal, and that is through touch and kind words and acceptance. And one of the biggest secrets is hearing your child say, I love you, or through sign language, or their way of saying I love you. You know, I sometimes get so busy that when one of my children say, "Mom, I sure love you," it just kind of startles me back to reality, and I realize that's the main thing, is love, and hearing "I love you," and feeling "I love you," and I smile during this time, or just a nod, I see you, and I just want to say I love you, and I support you. So get to know these parents, especially the moms, and there are some single dads. Find ways to minister to them, because them kind words may be the only words that they hear throughout their day or long periods of time. So just think, our Lord said to love those who He first loved. And He had a purpose in putting love into the human heart.
You know, we don't always understand why they're just not, parents aren't just open and ready to come join our church and see what we have to offer at the church. And we have to remember that they've been through a lot, and on that spectrum that we went through of the circle, they could be anywhere on there. They could be in the phase of not wanting to admit that there's something wrong with their child, to the point of being angry maybe at God about it, or disillusioned by other people and the way they've treated them, and they're depressed. So you have to just love on them. You just have to take time to show them that you care before you can minister to them, because they're not going to trust you just because you say, "Oh, we really want you to be part of our church." They're not going to trust that you really, truly mean that you have the concept. And maybe you don't have full understanding of what their needs are at that time, but just knowing I'm going to be ready, and I'm going to learn, and I'm going to let God lead me, then you're more ready to be a part of that ministry. We're going to start talking about how to start some ministries, what the church can do to minister to other people. And Sue, you want to tell us a little bit about where to start, because you've started some ministries.
Yes, I will refer back to when we first became parents to Philip. I was raised in church, married, continued in church. My two children by birth, started them in church just as babies. And so I thought, okay, Philip's going to live with us. We'll take him to church. And boy, was my eyes opened. The church we was members of, I was teaching a Sunday school class for children. So he came in my Sunday school class, and I noticed that he had a hard time sitting and listening, but it really didn't bother me, because if you teach children, that's just, you have some that can sit and some that have a harder time sitting. But then the church asked me to do another job, and I prayed about it and accepted this job that was teaching children's worship service. And so they said, we'll get a teacher to teach your Sunday school class so that you'll have more time to be a worship leader. And I said, well, what about Philip? And they said, oh, this teacher will be able to handle him. That'll be no problem. So we left Philip into this small Sunday school class. And that teacher came to me afterwards and said, I don't know what to do with Philip. I don't know how to teach him. I think it would be best that you not have him in the Sunday school class. I was devastated. I was heartbroken. I cried. I just didn't know what to do. And I began to pray, God, how can this church be so closed-minded? How can they not see that Philip is just like any other 9-year-old? God was using me during that time to teach me that He had a special ministry for me and my family. And He led us to a church that had a special ministry for children with disabilities. And my eyes was open at how important that this ministry was. You know, some children go into a regular classroom with other children with no problem, but there's some children that just need that little extra help, and that was Philip. And he thrived in this class with special needs, and a teacher that understood him. And God opened the door to start training me how to start church special ministry classes. And he sent the right people into my life to train me. And that's how Sandra and I met, is these trainings, and with people who were willing to share their knowledge and gifts that God had given them. So some of the steps in planning a ministry is to pray, and that God will open the church's eyes. It's just more than just one person's vision to start a special needs ministry. The church has to be a part of that. And some churches have families with special needs children already in it. Most churches don't. Very few churches that I have attended had families like myself that had special children with special needs. So you need to start visiting and finding these children and families in your community and find ways to connect with them. And some of the things, once you get the churches okay, or your pastor, talking with your pastor and leadership, and saying, let's think about starting a special needs ministry in our church. And most of the time they'd say, okay, if that's what you want to do,
Do it.
do it.
Yeah.
I've got that many times. If that's what you feel God's called